I want to start by letting you all know, if you have not yet seen Shelley Walker's talk from last Sunday, please check it out. I call it the Lily Talk. What a gift that was. Thank you so very much. Thank you so very much. So, 15 years ago, I started ministerial school, 15 and a half years ago-ish. And my daughters were little back then. Life was very different back then. Some of you knew me back then. And this dream of mine to start ministerial school felt impossible. It literally, it felt so far from the life that I was living. And I recall that I just kept having recurring dreams about it. It was showing up as God in my life. All the spiritual nudges kept happening as much as I tried to ignore them. Anyone? Some of you might know, maybe, that in my recent past life, my first career, I was an actor. My background, I'm trained in classical theater and Shakespeare and musical theater and did all the things, and that is how I made my living. But all the while, I was a spiritual seeker. All the while, I was longing to feel close to the divine. It started when I was very young, actually, as a kid. And so, the last few years of my 30s, I recognize now I was silently preparing myself to leave that business, which is all I had known, and to embark on what I do now, which felt, again, completely impossible. So fast forwarding a few years, after I finally just couldn't ignore the nudge anymore, I remember sitting down with my ministerial dean, and my overwhelming feeling when I sat down with her was that it was very possible that she might just say, "This isn't for you. You were an actor, and because my biggest fear was that no one would take me seriously. That was my biggest fear. And so I sat down with this woman who was about my age, thinking to myself, who am I kidding? I can't possibly do this. And this woman was Reverend Dr. Catherine Economou. And I shared with her my concerns, and she so lovingly and so kindly laughed. She let me know that most ministers in our particular movement find this as a second career, sometimes a third career. It takes us a while for this calling to land and for us to say yes. And she shared with me that in her previous life, she was a trained dancer. And so, instant friends, instant connection. She loved the arts, and she celebrated that in me. I thought that I needed to, somehow become more serious. I was becoming a minister, and I should be serious. Again, she kindly laughed. She understood my deepest calling and need for a contemplative, spiritual life, a life where I could be of service to others, and a life where I could dedicate myself to my relationship with God, with Spirit, with Source. And in essence, she gave me permission to bring my full self to this calling, jazz hands and all. That was our private joke. Whenever things got silly, we would go, jazz hands, to remind us of balance. And Reverend Dr. Catherine was kind of witchy and woo-woo like me, and we loved that about each other. She celebrated and encouraged my commitment to social justice, especially in my early days when some other colleagues were telling me that I should stay quiet about these things. They didn't want me to rock that boat. Sit down, sit down, sit down, sit down, sit down, you're rocking the boat, was my response. Bring a little musical theater wherever I can. Catherine was my dean, she was my teacher, she was my colleague, and she was my beloved friend. When I graduated ministerial school, I was walking towards her in the parking lot. It was such a huge day. I still look forward to celebrating that with you, Shelley. Oh my goodness, what a day it is to finally be done with school. But she saw me walking, and as I approached her, she looked at me like through my soul. You know when people look at you like that, in your eyes, through your soul? She looked at me and she said, "Reverend Shannon," which was like, oh my God, she called me Reverend. She said, "Reverend Shannon, someday you're going to have a vibrant, beautiful community." I have to tell you, at that time in my life, never in a million years that I think I would be a leader of a community. But she was very clear in the vision that she saw of me. She said, "No, you're going to be a leader in a community." And I mean, like, my kids were little and I was doing lots of other things and I had no interest in that at that time. I figured I would be a different kind of minister. But she knew, she always saw the potential in me, even when I didn't. She was that friend. She was that person. She is that friend. She is that person. And on June 27th at 4:04 a.m., she made her transition. She died at 53 years old. Her daughter Emily is only 16. Her beloved Steve just loves her. While she was sick for a very long time, it was still enormously crushing and heartbreaking. On that same day, Thursday, June 27th, that was the wedding rehearsal for my daughter. And I officiated her wedding. I cannot begin to tell you the joy that I felt. I mean, there was I swear, there was an army of angels keeping me upright when I saw her walk down that aisle. To me, some of you will remember we've celebrated Livia here. Livy came to us through the miracle of adoption in Russia. So her journey to walk down that aisle was so exquisitely important. And it was hard-won for her. My joy for her to get to that place, to marry this man, Stephen, who is now my son-in-law, was huge. He is a deeply kind man. And the joy that I felt on that day, officiating my daughter's wedding, and the grief that I was navigating with Catherine's passing, I tell you, my friends, I learned so much. My talk today is called How We Hold Two Things at Once. How we hold two things at once. So from a spiritual perspective, how do we, with a capital H, hold two opposite things at once? How do we navigate the polarities of this life? How do we, for example, love someone so deeply and at the same time so fundamentally disagree with their choices? So much so that we might not even be able to be around them, but we love them. That polarity. I know that that is happening for some of you during this election season in your families. We just had the 4th of July, Independence Day. How do we celebrate our love for the good in this country? And there is so much good. But how do we celebrate freedom in this country when there are so many people, women, people of color, LGBTQIA people, the marginalized, who are not yet free? How do we do that? Shelley so beautifully said in her talk last week, the wholeness of God meets us everywhere we are. The wholeness of God meets us everywhere we are. So we start there. We start with the deepest recognition that whatever it is that we are holding that may feel fractured, The wholeness of God, the strength of the divine, the love of Spirit is right where we are. We just forget. In any given moment, you can place your hand on your heart. I invite you to do that if you're comfortable. Those of you at home, just place your hand on your heart, just easily. It instantly grounds. It's an instantly grounding gesture. It reminds us of love. You can silently say to yourself, God is right here. Spirit is right here. Unconditional love is right here. I invite you to do that now, just silently. Whatever phrase works for you, just silently 3 times repeat to yourself. God is right here. Spirit is right here. Love is right here. 3 times. You can do that anywhere, at any time. No one will know. Spirit is right here. It's not in the sky. It's not in the astrological reading, although I love astrology. It's not in futurizing. God will come, I will feel God, I will experience the divine. It's not conditional. It is right here. Spirit is right here. It is right here. Always, in all ways. In my own personal journey, the more that I began to deeply recognize that Spirit, that divinity walks with me, breathes through me, speaks through me, uplifts me, buoys me, holds me, the more easily I began to navigate the polarities in this life. The grief and the joy, the good and the painful. If you remember in the breath, on the breath, that love is right where you are, that Spirit is right where you are, that the universe has your entire back, I promise you it helps. I promise you. And make no mistake, this is a lifelong practice. I had to remember it on Thursday, June 27th. I don't even want to say the date. June 27th. When you remember, and when you allow yourself to remember so fully that you know in your bones that the love of Spirit that animates your very being, that woke you up this day that love has made, your whole being begins to feel a bit stronger. You are reminded that you are not alone in this journey. When you remember that Spirit is right with you, you immediately feel even just the tiniest bit more empowered. You remember that you are accompanied by a vibrational force of love that is always for you. It is always, I think, important in this whole experience of also recognizing that it is totally normal to feel opposing emotions at the same time. Disconcerting, really difficult, and really normal. So as people on a spiritual path, how do we navigate this in an easier way? Number one, God is right where I am. I'm not experiencing these two polar emotions alone. Spirit is with me in this. Have you ever had that experience where you laugh so hard that you start crying, and then you start really crying? Or you're really crying, and then you start really laughing? That is God. That is Spirit in us, opening that doorway just a little bit more for us to experience the full range of our humanness, and to give us the opportunity to practice grace with ourselves. With ourselves. The digital creator Lonnie from Healing Hearts wrote You are allowed to be happy, hurting, and healing all at once. You are a human, not a rock. You are allowed to be happy, hurting, and healing all at once. You are a human, not a rock. In our practitioner retreat this past weekend, our beloved practitioner, Beth Doyle, gave us the most incredible presentation. We've got to put pictures on the website because it's so hilarious. And it was on whole brain living by Dr. Jill Bolte Taylor. It's her newest book. It just came out about 2 years ago. We had so much fun with it. She created this whole thing. We didn't know, but she had worked out with 4 other practitioners. It's sort of the improv troupe, and they had costumes and all of these wonderful things, and it was this wonderful way to illustrate for us the biology of the human brain. They each played a character. Because from the scientific perspective, we learned that within the 4 sections or chambers of our brains, we are actually designed to have often conflicting emotions at the same time. This is part of our biology. And when we can understand that that part of ourself is activated, it supports remembering that we can too integrate it. The ancients experienced the same humanness that we do. In the Hebrew Bible, the story goes that the people felt mixed emotions when they returned to Jerusalem after being held captive in Babylon for 70 years. Can you imagine? Their city, when they returned, was in complete ruins, yet the first thing they did was to rebuild their house of worship. Was the first thing they did, meaning what they're teaching us millennia later is the first thing is to remember God, to remember Spirit. God is here, Spirit is here. They created a place that was a tangible reminder that God was right where they are. But as they were laying the foundation of their new building, it is written, some of the people shouted thanksgiving to God, while others wept loudly when they remembered what the other temple had looked like. How human is that? It's the perfect example of this journey of ours. And it is a spiritual walk to consciously practice integrating all the parts of ourselves. All the parts of ourselves. I can tell you with my whole being that there would have been absolutely no way that I could have officiated my daughter's wedding if I had not yet acknowledged the depth of the grief that I was also feeling. By acknowledging the emotions that I was having, I was able to, in real time, create the spaciousness within myself to actually be more fully present. Us humans, we want to compartmentalize and numb. It is so crucially important. It is a spiritual path to walk through the feeling, to not brush it away, but to allow all the parts of ourselves to be fully felt. All the parts of our being to be fully felt. Only then can we be present. Otherwise, we're doing this little like dodgeball. You know what I mean? If one person says one thing and we're not dealing with our grief or our sadness or whatever it might be, woo, dodge that ball. Because look out. As I actively engaged in this process in real time, I thought of all of you. I literally was like, oh my gosh, as I'm processing this internally, I'm thinking to myself, I must bring this to my community. I need to remind you how important it is for us to be compassionate with ourselves. Many of us were not taught how to do that, how to be compassionate with ourselves. Not all, but many of us. And it requires the most profound compassion so that we don't unconsciously bypass or compartmentalize, but so that we are fully present and we acknowledge in real time that we're holding both things at once. We don't have to pretend we're not. That's nonsense. Let's just be honest. Do you know? What is that whole thing when someone says, "How are you doing?" Remember in the old days where "I'm fine, I'm great, how are you?" That's false. It's a lie if that's not how you're feeling. Now, if you are feeling that way, that's great. We don't have to do that. We can unlearn that. We can say, "I'm holding two things at once right now. I'm in grief and I'm in joy right now. I'm in fear for my country and I'm in love with my country right now." We can hold two things at once and we can be honest about it with each other. And I encourage us to do that. This is how we're going to get through this time in history, is being honest and naming it. And recognizing that this compassion that we have within us, it is spirit, it's God, and it stands at the ready always. So our daughter Liv, she decided to get married in Utah, beautiful Utah, because it was sort of a central place for all of the family to fly in. And after the wedding was done, and it was a beautiful wedding, by the way. It was such a beautiful wedding. The next day, we all went to the airport, and I was traveling with my family, both of my parents, my sister, her husband, their 3 little kids. It was a big group. We were all there at the Salt Lake City Airport. If any of you have been to the Salt Lake City Airport, wear comfortable shoes. There's lots of walking. It takes 35 minutes to walk from security to the gate where we were. And I share that for a reason. Because there we were at our gate, and the plane ended up being delayed by 26 hours. Yep. Apparently there was a flat tire on the plane, and John Doobie, you were a pilot. That's a big deal. That's a big deal. So we arrived at the airport at, like 5:30 in the evening, and by midnight there was this long line of people behind the ticket counter trying to get rebooked on other flights and hotels and all of the things, and the young man that was behind the counter was extremely flustered. His name was Aaron, and he looked a bit like a deer in the headlights. And, he was doing his absolute best, but literally nothing was being accomplished. Finally, at one point, he made the announcement that everyone should just try on their own to get their own hotel, because the airlines were having no success. There also happened to be that weekend both a concert and an air show. So it was one of those. All the hotel rooms were sold out. It was one of those, right? And so, there we all are, and everybody's on the phone trying to do what they can do. And, there's a woman, an elderly woman that I can see is very concerned. Her name was Madeline. We made friends. She was able to find a hotel room, but she didn't know how to use Uber. So I taught her how to use Uber so she could, get in the Uber and get to her hotel room, because there were none at the airport. All of the hotels, any of them that had any rooms, were at least 40 minutes away. So it was one of those, and there was another young woman who was pregnant, and she was also nursing a little baby, and she was alone, and she was weepy. And so, of course, I went over and I asked her if she needed water and what I could do to support her. And she said, "Oh, no, I'm fine, but thank you, it'll be okay," kind of thing. And so, I don't know, 2 hours later, I go back up to Aaron, and I'm asking him if he has any luck, and he just says, "Do you want to come use the JetBlue computer? You might have better luck than me." So I went behind the counter and was using the JetBlue computer, trying to find a hotel for, all of us, and to no avail. So I went back to my seat. I'm still trying. 40 minutes later, I'm on hold, and my mom turns to me and says, "Was Aaron of any help?" And I said, "Aaron is of little help, Mom." And she said, "Oh, okay." Right after that, I kid you not, I look up and over to the ticket counter, and there is Aaron, and he's holding the sleeping baby, while the young mom is on the phone trying to get a room for the night. We are a multitude. We hold multitudes. We are complex beings capable of both giving thanks for the laying down of the new foundation of our temple and at the same time feeling deep loss for the destruction of the first temple. As we move through this time in history, this crucial time, I know that I am going to remember Aaron. He is going to help me when I am frustrated watching the news, when there are people that I do not agree with. I am going to remember Aaron. And I'm going to remember him holding that baby, because in that moment when I saw him holding that sleeping baby, I saw grace. I saw God. I saw love in action. My whole understanding of Aaron as a person shifted, and I was reminded that other people hold seeming opposites too. It's easy for me to name it for myself, grief and joy, and get frustrated when I see unskilled behavior in others. But the spiritual path is to remember that underneath the unskilled behavior in others is the love of the divine at the center of their being. It's the truth of who they really are, whatever political affiliation they're with. There is no more God in one person than there is in another. We are a mixture of contradictions as humans. We are complex. And in this adulting that we are all doing, it really requires compassion. It really requires compassion. Because when we choose to be compassionate with ourselves, it always leads to courage. Think about it. To have courage requires the compassion. Compassion is the bridge to our courage and to our bravery. To name our own conflicting emotions. It takes bravery to give yourself the spaciousness to feel both grief and joy. It takes bravery to be your own witness to the parts of you that are hurting. And celebrating too. For some of us, it takes courage to acknowledge that which we are celebrating. It takes courage to believe in the good in other people, even when we can't see it. This doesn't mean that we don't have to agree with them. We still stand for what we believe in 100%. But recognizing that we are all multitudes. Protecting our democracy is the spiritual work that we as a community are going to be engaging in this summer. Given the last ruling of the Supreme Court, how can we not? This is our spiritual work to do. We can hold it all, my friends. We can hold it because we are here to do that. I'm going to talk more about that in our community meeting later today. But this week, I just invite you to remember, hand on your heart, as they used to say, hand to God. Spirit is right where you are, every single moment. The second thing, I invite you to look for the people, especially if they are hard to love, who are holding the babies. Find those people. Let them buoy you up. And finally, I invite you to bring compassion to your heart so that you can lean into your own courage, so that you can stand in the truth that yes, we are multitudes, we are also miracles. And every single one of us is loved, lovable, and worth loving. Let's lead with that in the coming weeks and months.